Hey, Naomi. I like seeing you all the time. Marissa Rahman. Marissa Rahman. Good morning, everyone. There is such a thing as gay time, but we are not starting on gay time. We are starting on time. So we have a lot to cover, and I want to get us started on time. I would like for our opening prayer to be a text of a hymn that we sang Thursday as part of the collaborative Pride service. Just a bit of a hymn. Let us pray. Quirky, queer, and wonderful, distinct, unique, and odd, all of our humanity reveals the face of God. No normal can encompass or comprehend the range of all the kinds of people that God created strange. Quirky, queer, and wonderful, distinct, unique, and odd, all of our humanity reveals the face of God. Amen. Thank you all for being here. There are many places you could have been, and this is a great place for you to be. I'm David Hoover. I'm a member of St. Paul's. I've been here for about 4 years. I'm a therapist in private practice, specializing in trauma treatment. I'm an openly gay man, and I lead various retreats for gay and straight people. I think straight people are lovely and need to be on this earth. I am here to introduce our guests, but also to talk a little bit why Christians should care about trans folks. And I'd like to say it started with the beginning of creation. God created the whole universe and said, "It is very good." And God created trans as part of that, and even said, "Male and female created he them." Think about that. God made all of us. So God, as they said in the 60s, don't make no junk. And we are here to talk about the valued preciousness of the transgender folks among us. And it goes back to, in our Jewish tradition, when God instructed folks to raise crops, people were instructed to leave some of the crops around the edges so poor folks could have enough to eat. You weren't supposed to use up everything in order to provide for the least fortunate. Certainly lots of places in Scripture. We have a kind of a hidden trans person in the Ethiopian eunuch. You can ask about that later. But in Matthew 25, we hear, if you've done it unto the least of these, my brethren and sister, you have done it unto me. So certainly in our times today, transgender folks are among the least of these. Demonized, the lack of information around transgender folk is used to make them scary, come up with all sorts of stories about the way we are mutilating their bodies and just using all sorts of fear-mongering language about trans folks. So, and there is a concerted effort, and we'll learn more about that from our speakers, from right-wing extremist groups to mobilize around school boards and around transgender people in particular. So when God tells us, when you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me, we are called to get more information about transgender folks, to understand the humanity of these God-created people, and to understand better how to show love as we live our lives together as people of faith. We're very lucky today to have the Executive Director of Virginia Equality Virginia, Nerissa Rahaman, and Chris Berg is a dad who has a transgender son in the Hanover School District. Hanover is part of a national strategy, go outside of the cities and the immediate suburbs and target school boards in more rural areas and focus on anti-trans, anti-LGBT information. So I need to shut up for a little bit, and I want Nerissa to take it away. One other thing I want to say, this is the first of a series of our Faith in Action. James, the book of James says, faith without works is dead. So we're doing works as a part of our faith. And in this booklet, there's a whole list of the social action interests that we have around housing, around anti-racism, other kinds of events that are coming up, and we'll talk more about that. So Nerissa, could you talk to us a little bit about where you see transgender policies happening and what's going on in the Commonwealth of Virginia? And we'll be open for questions kind of all along the way, but set the stage for us. What's happening regarding transgender folks in Virginia?
Yeah, thank you so much, David, and thank you everyone here for joining us this morning for an important conversation. As David mentioned, my name is Nerissa Rahaman. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Executive Director at Equality Virginia. We're a statewide LGBTQ advocacy organization, and a lot of our work is tracking legislation that's impacting LGBTQ people and working with lawmakers, at the Capitol right around the corner on making sure that the good pieces of legislation, the ones that are going to positively impact our lives, are moving forward. And when there are negative ones that are going to negatively impact our lives, that we're doing everything that we can, to stop those from getting to the governor's desk. What I'm going to talk about specifically for Virginia is not just a Virginia issue. These are national trends that are happening in state legislatures around the country. And what we see, a lot of it, is that we do see pendulum swings in sort of like the number of what I will call anti-LGBTQ or anti-trans bills increase around, the times of elections or when there's a change in balance of power. Equality Virginia is a nonpartisan organization, and so we do not do work specifically to promote one political party over another. But during my time today, I will use political terms such as Democrats or Republicans, because what we are seeing is that, the lawmakers who are introducing these bills, most of them tend to be Republicans. And so I'm only using those terms to sort of differentiate who is introducing these bills. But here in Virginia, this session, the 2023 session, we saw 12 anti-LGBTQ bills introduced, and they're actually, all of the bills were specifically targeting trans people, and when we boil that down even more, most of them were impacting transgender youth. Like I said, this is not just something that's happening in a vacuum here in Virginia, it's a part of a national trend. And so this year, we saw over 500 anti-LGBTQ bills introduced around the country in state legislatures just like our own. And a majority of those bills, 300 or more, are again targeting transgender people and their ability to live authentic lives and enjoy moving through the world in a similar fashion that many of us do, that we go to the bathroom without having any issues, or we seek health care and we don't have any issues. And so we have seen a large uptick and an increase in these anti-trans bills that are being introduced. Now, you might say, well, gosh, Narissa, that's 500 bills around the country, a dozen here in Virginia. Surely these must actually be addressing some sort of policy issue that constituents have brought up to their lawmakers. But what we've seen and what our national partners have seen is that there's a small group of organizations like Alliance Defending Freedom, Heritage Foundation, that write these bills. These two groups write these bills, and then they actually shop them around to lawmakers around the country. And so, specifically here in Virginia, we had one bill that would have prevented trans youth from playing on sports teams. It was the exact same bill, same language that was introduced in Idaho. And, for me, Virginia and Idaho seem like very different places. And so how can, a quote unquote Idaho problem also be a Virginia problem? And so it's important to share that, no constituents are bringing up these issues to their legislatures, their legislators. These right-wing groups who are claiming to protect women or protect children are actually doing it to harm the community. And so we are seeing carbon copies of bills introduced, around the country. And this is causing political debates to happen. And those debates, when it's, a foundation of misinformation and disinformation, is really impacting the mental health of LGBTQ people. And I'll get into a little bit about the specific bills that we're seeing. But, I want folks to know that when we are, sort of questioning the humanity of trans people and who they are, that's impacting how they see themselves and how they see themselves moving through the world, whether that is safely or whether that is not. And specifically transgender youth, about 86% of them are watching these debates unfold around the country. And so imagine if you are 6 years old or 12 years old or a teenager and, you're watching adults who know nothing about you debate whether you should be able to, go to school and be called by, the name you want to be called by, or play on a sports team, or if you're an adult and want to, access healthcare eventually, how that's going to make you feel trying to grow up and sort of what safe spaces that you have. And so I think a lot of these lawmakers really want to distill down LGBTQ people, but specifically trans people, and saying that, we have, that they have an idea of how people, should look, dress, act, everything, and sort of using those bills to control day-to-day lives. Like I said, there's an intentional effort to use misinformation and disinformation to deceive people who may not know anything about trans and non-binary people. And so it's really, I think, up to us and the work we here at Equality Virginia do, and I think the broader community and, in this conversation that we're having today, is that when we when we can show people who LGBTQ people are, when we can show people who trans people are, and create a community of safety, we can stop these bills from happening. Because a lot of what these bills do is to remove safe spaces for trans people to exist. When you have a bill that might be targeting access to health care or criminalizing doctors, if a trans person doesn't have a doctor that they can go to, or if you have a youth who, a law is now telling them that their teacher needs to out them to potentially unsupportive parents, that youth who spends most of their time at school, who can they go to that is a safe space? And so a lot of these bills, I think, are also designed to remove a circle of care and community and safety that a lot of us as LGBTQ people need to move through the world. A lot of us, because we often live in states that don't have fully inclusive laws, we often move through the world via our community or other safe spaces that we have. And so these laws, are also created to remove those spaces. So I'm going to get into a few of the bills and the policy issues that they're covering and really what we're seeing around anti-trans bills, and specifically here in Virginia. So like I mentioned, we had 12 anti-trans bills that were introduced this year. Several were what I like to call just anti-education bills. They're sort of there to make our schools less safe for students. They're there to remove resources for teachers to provide to trans youth on how to create inclusive classrooms. There were also bills targeting trans inclusion in sports. So, a trans girl wants to be able to play on, the girls' sports team. And then there are also bills targeting access to health care. And healthcare in this case, I'll also use the word gender affirming care. That is that access to healthcare. We have really seen an uptick in legislation that's targeting that access specifically. It's important to say that there are major medical associations that our doctors look to for guidance when they're wanting to learn more about treatment. But organizations like the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, and American Academy of Pediatrics, all of those associations see gender affirming care as medically necessary and age-appropriate medical care. And I think it's important to note that these conversations about gender-affirming care, those are happening between parents and youth and their doctors, and they're taken into consideration with a lot of care, and they're individualized, to that family and to that youth. And so, no decisions are really being made without without that best practice guidance from both the doctor and the parent. I think it's also important to say a lot of, there are some trans people who choose not to medically transition as well. And so every transgender person's, journey on becoming who they are might include medical transition, and it might also not. Treatments can include things like hormonal therapies. They can also include surgical procedures. It really depends on the individual, and again, those decisions are being made between patient and parent, or patient and doctor if they're an adult. There are some states, we did not see this, I don't think we saw this specifically here in Virginia, but we've also seen some states, when introducing bills to ban gender-affirming care or trans health care, that would make doctors and parents liable for providing those services. We saw it a lot in places like Texas that would revoke licenses from doctors, barring them forever practicing, again, just because they're providing gender-affirming care to patients. We're also seeing, continuing to push quote unquote bathroom bills. And these bills have existed for a while. You all may remember, I think back in 2016, Delegate Bob Marshall, tried to introduce a bathroom bill. And so bathroom bills are really to exclude trans people from accessing multi-use locker rooms, restrooms, and other spaces. And so the argument behind these bills is that trans people should not be allowed to use the bathrooms that align with their gender identity. So, a trans woman should not be allowed to use a women's bathroom. A trans man should not be allowed to use a men's bathroom because they might pose a safety risk to other people in there. What we know to actually be true through research is that trans people are actually the ones at risk when they are accessing these spaces. They are the ones that are at risk for bullying, harassment, and even violence. And again, when we're, a lot of that rhetoric we're seeing around these bills of it's a safety issue, we're going to be unsafe if trans people are sharing a space with us, that misinformation and disinformation increases the likelihood of violence against the trans community. Now, what we do see is that when we allow trans people to use bathrooms that align with their gender identity, it actually doesn't have any impact on crimes that are committed in facilities. Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm thinking about using a bathroom, I'm just thinking about using a bathroom. It is the same of when I'm in my home, I'm in this tiny little room going to the bathroom and I'm going to leave, and I'm sure it's the same for you. I'm not really concerned about what the person in the stall might be doing next to me. And so I think you can start to see specifically around the bathroom issue about how it's really trying to make life difficult for trans people. Imagine if, someone told us or a lawmaker was trying to write a bill that would prevent us from using a bathroom and how that would change your day to day. You'd have to travel somewhere where you knew you could safely use it or potentially go back to your home, and that really just makes life difficult. When you add that in and you think about youth in Virginia's K through 12 schools, having to hold in their bladder all day and not being able to relieve themselves until they get home, or to potentially travel to a different part of the school and have to, walk down multiple hallways just to use the bathroom. So again, these bills and these laws are all designed to just make life difficult. We've also are seeing, states, and we've had this in Virginia recently, that make it harder for people to change the information on their state ID cards or birth certificates. Now in Virginia in 2020 and 2021, under Governor Northam, we did sign into law bills that eased the process. Previously in Virginia and in some other states, you would have to print an ad in the paper saying that you were going to change your name or pay fees or other things that would require you to jump through hoops just to update the name on your identity document or maybe change your gender marker. I know for none of us enjoy going to the DMV to do anything, but when we add in those those extra steps, it can really force people to avoid seeking those services that exist to us. And I want you all to think about your passport or your Social Security card, your birth certificate, your driver's license, how much access that gives you to the world when seeking employment, when you want to open up a bank account, when you're going to the doctor, maybe when you're looking for housing, looking to rent an apartment. And so when we make it difficult for trans and non-binary people to update their identity documents, they have a much harder time doing those things of getting to rent an apartment or find a job, open a bank account. And so again, when we put obstacles in front of them, they will turn inward and find other routes to sort of seek community. Maybe they are never able to have a place on their own, and they will stay with a friend. And so by removing these barriers to updating identity documents, we are creating a whole new world of possibility for trans and non-binary people to exist, in the exact same way.
Narissa, I'm gonna interrupt. I'm
Yes.
sorry.
Yeah.
And I wonder if we could have one question
Yeah.
from the crowd, and then hear from Chris's experience in Hanover, and have a little interaction. Any questions that are yes?
I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but one of the things I was wondering is, does your group have any insight into what's driving the legislation? I know in Virginia, in the last gubernatorial election, one of the big issues was parental control in schools. And I tend to see a lot of this legislation, at least here, through that lens that's maybe being motivated by politics. But I don't know if you have any studies on that issue.
Yeah, I mean, what is driving it, for us, and this, I think, our national partners that we work with would agree, is that there's really two driving forces. One, obviously, is political power. I think a lot of lawmakers think that running on these issues, running these bills, will allow them to continue to win elections and hold on to power, when, in actuality, we know that these type of bills really only motivate an extreme part of their base that is already going to vote for them anyway. No one is winning elections on anti-trans issues. We're actually seeing candidates really, really lose on it. And I think, sadly, like, the other part of what is driving this is a goal to erase LGBTQ people from public life. I think these lawmakers do want to make our lives, our lives so difficult to live that we make a decision: do we want to live them anymore? When we aren't able, when kids aren't able to go to school and they don't have that space there, or they might be in limbo between which is a safer space for me, a school that might not be fully affirming, or a home that might not be fully supportive. It's going to really put us at risk for things like suicide or self-harm. And so I really see those as the two issues. And, your point about the parental rights is that parents' rights obviously do matter, and they always will. And I think that is the newest sort of political moment we are in right now, of using the term parental rights to advance a political agenda. And the political agenda, I think, with that, is to undermine our public education system and harm students. Yeah.
Which is a good segue to Chris, a real life parent who cares a lot about his transgender son.
Hi, so my name is Chris Berg. So, like David mentioned, I'm a parent of a trans student in Hanover Schools. I'm also a board member on Equality Virginia's board. So my son came out, it was a few months before the pandemic. So he came out a little, well, not older. People come out at all sorts of ages, but so, we kind of, my family kind of came into this around middle school, high school, and really kind of started experiencing this right around when the battle around the Northam era and then into the Youngkin era transgender policies for students in schools started. My kind of first experience with this in Hanover was when my son went to his counselor at school. And they have a gender-neutral bathroom in school that kids can go to, fill out a form, and ask for a key to the bathroom. If they don't feel comfortable going to, the women's bathroom or men's bathroom or whatever, they can request access to this bathroom. It's supposed to be no questions asked. They fill out a form, stating that they understand, what the policy is if they abuse it, go in and do drugs in the bathroom or something like that, that they can lose access to the bathroom. The school policy is that no calls are made home. It's something that was agreed upon by the school board. So my first experience with that was immediately after my son leaves the counselor's office, after filling out the form, is the counselor calls my wife. And it was intentionally done in a way that she was calling to tattle on my kid. Did you know? Are you okay with this? And, I found out recently that she had done this to a bunch of students. And I don't know if you guys know the statistics around, I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but there are a lot of LGBTQ students who experience abuse at home, experience homelessness because they don't feel that home is safe, or they are kicked out of their homes. Outing a student to their parents before the student's ready, or to an unsafe parent is a bad situation. So to have my student's counselor was the head of counseling, or is the head of counseling at his high school, intentionally against school policy, calling parents, was really jarring. So that was kind of our first run-in with the school. And that was right around the point where the school board started debating whether or not they were going to adopt the Northern Era policies on treatment of transgender students in schools. And, I don't know if any of you've looked at them, read about them, or heard about them, but it was well-written, well-researched. It was put together with the community and a bunch of partners on how to help these students be more accepted in schools, had a bunch of guidelines, reference material. It was based on research. It was a well put together policy. It was the intention of the lawmakers who put together the law. The law was passed with this policy in mind. I believe it was actually kind of in the works before the law was actually even passed. But so Hanover rejected the policy. The only thing they put in place at that point in time was that a student could, with their parents, request that the student be addressed by a different name at school, and that they could state their preferred pronouns that they'd like to use at school. So that was the first school board meeting that I'd ever been to. I don't know if a lot of you have kids, but not a lot of parents go to school board meetings. People go to school board meetings when their kids get awards. There's something big going on at school, you need to talk about a teacher or something big that happened at school. Most of the time, school board meetings are pretty quiet, uneventful things. Hanover school board meetings are a whole different situation. Granted, the last few years, school board meetings across the country are an entirely different situation, but our school board meetings tend to be packed most of the time. Sometimes it is people are outside because there's not enough room for people to be in the boardroom. The crazy thing about the form is, you fill out the form. My student would like to be addressed by X. At that point in time, he had come out as non-binary. It's a very typical transition state for trans students. And so he used they/them pronouns at that point in time. And it really was kind of useless because the teachers who cared about it, he had already talked to, and they already used his preferred name and pronouns. And the information that was on that form went into the system, but it was in an area that was so not obvious that the teachers, even the teachers who cared but hadn't been told by my son, didn't ever see it. It was like a little alert in the corner on the roll sheet. I think it's the same place that they put like allergies and stuff like that. Like it was a not very obvious place. You really had to like dig for it. So it was kind of just a token gesture, I think, by the school board at that point in time. That kind of meetings kind of went on. Things really came to a head in, I believe it was March of the next year, when Hanover invited Alliance Defending Freedom, and Narissa mentioned them, to come into Hanover and help them write their bathroom policy for trans students. And so I don't know how many of you are familiar with Alliance Defending Freedom, but if some of you are familiar with the Colorado Baker case, Alliance Defending Freedom was the group who was involved in the Colorado Baker case, and several other cases that have gone to the Supreme Court. They're one of the groups that writes kind of these copycat bills that go around to different states. So to have that group, who is very much anti-LGBTQ, involved in our little county's bathroom policy was a little crazy and a lot scary. Because obviously they weren't trying to write a, equitable policy. They weren't trying to kind of find some middle ground. They were trying to potentially write something that could go all the way to the Supreme Court from a legal standpoint. At the very least, they were trying to find something that would go as far as they could legally.
And Chris, could you tell us a little bit about your son Ember's experience at Hanover, what it's been like to be there?
Yeah, that's a good question. He's like a lot of other queer kids in school. They find pockets of kind of safety at school. There are, areas where kids that, can kind of thrive. The arts, for instance, is a good place where, theater and art classroom, band is one that I wouldn't have anticipated that a lot of kids flock to. They're good teachers that they know that they're safe around. One of the weirdest experiences that I ever found out about that I never expected was teachers openly talking about the trans student policies in classroom. Not during class, but just kind of on the side and very loudly while the students were working on their classwork. So I don't know if you've ever had anybody loudly in a room discussing whether or not you were worthy of rights, but it's a bit surreal. To have your son come home and talk to you about that and mention that that's what happened at school today. That my teacher was talking about whether or not trans kids are faking it, whether or not they should be allowed in bathrooms, whether or not they should be allowed in school. That's tough for a student. One of the things I've talked about before is the negative atmosphere this causes for students in school. I don't know about you, but middle school and high school, or middle school in particular, but high school is a tough time for kids, right? It's hard enough getting through your classes and making sure that you're getting ready for college and stuff like that. It's way harder when you feel like you're an outcast.
I feel like everything is an interruption when we have such a short period of time, but I do want to open it up for questions from our folks. So let's do that. Any questions from our, yes?
So there's a certain fuzziness in how we talk about trans issues, and I'm wondering, from your perspective as a father, if you could maybe kind of quickly unpack for us, there's transvestism, there's same-sex orientation, there's gay, lesbian, there's trans youth, which is a gender identity, right? Can you sort of tell us, like, what is important to you for people to know about yourself? Do you see what I mean? I don't know if your son has same-sex orientation or not, but it's really the trans youth that we're talking about, the trans identity, right?
Yeah, so I guess I'm not sure I can answer all of those. When we talk about trans youth in schools, I think one of the things that confuses people a little bit, we talk about students who are assigned one gender at birth and identify as the opposite. So they may be assigned male at birth and identify as female, or vice versa. My son was assigned female at birth and identifies as male. Non-binary students fall under the trans umbrella too, although some people who are non-binary do not identify as transgender. It's kind of up to the individual, but typically when we talk about trans people, we are also referring to non-binary students as well, just because they don't fit, neatly in the, like I do. Kind of, I was assigned my gender at birth, and I fit neatly into that, identity.
And I'll take Chris off the hook. Steve, your question speaks to the fact that St. Paul's needs to have bigger conversations than what we can do in 3 more minutes. So I think it's a very important question and needs to be addressed. Another question over here. Yeah.
So there, we don't in particular. There are some really good partners in the area that do. Side by Side would probably be the one that I would reference. And I believe there actually is some information in the handouts available on Side by Side. That was actually one of they did a presentation in Hanover that I really liked, that it was eye-opening for me on gender identity and the gender spectrum and stuff like that. That was very helpful for me as a parent, because I can only ask my son so many questions before it kind of starts hurting his feelings a little bit, just to be frank. And B, he's 16 and he only knows so much. And He, She, Ze, and We is another fantastic group that does a lot of like family education and stuff like that. Yes. Yeah, and and I think one thing I found is, a lot of people tend to, not everybody, but a lot of people tend to change their minds once they learn more about trans people, or just gay people and queer people in general. It's a little bit different when it's kind of a very abstract topic. It's much more different when it's your neighbor or your friend or your child. It's easy to hate someone or fear them when it's an abstract concept and you're worried about them, I don't know,
And as Chris,
corrupting your child or
as,
something.
as Chris referenced, the handout has a number of organizations listed that help in these conversations. And I would highly recommend that you find the Gender Revolution, which is a National Geographic video that has Katie Couric as the most non-threatening host you could ever imagine, talking about transgender issue, interviewing about 5 different configurations of transgender folks of all different ages, and interwoven into the film is the science around it. And we really know that transgender, your sense of you being a male or female person in your body, starts in the first month in the womb. And you take my word for it. So it's a real live thing. I'm a gay man. I'm not transgender. I feel comfortable in my body. That's basically, I think men are really great. I like women too for, just hanging around. And I wanted to highlight that Dr. Susan Jones is with us, and she has done a lot of work. She's a psychiatrist who's done a lot of work with youth and transgender folks in particular. And sadly, we have one of our social action groups, RISK, is happening in this room right now, any minute now. So I want you to continue to have conversations. I'm going to invite our guest speakers to hang out in the hallway, and all of you who aren't risk people to hang out in the hallway. I hope, Dr. Jones, that you'll maybe hang out and answer questions. This really, I mean, Steve, your question, I really mean it. It highlights how many questions there are and how we haven't had big conversations, even as a relatively progressive place, about vocabulary and language and all sorts of things. Yes?
Could you tell us again the name of the Katie Torch that you asked?
Gender Revolution. It's at the bottom of the handout. Yeah, yeah. And it's really terrific. Let's give a hand to our guest speakers, Narissa and Chris. Thank you all so much. Thank you. And I apologize for any hurt feelings for cutting off, but oh my gosh, 45 minutes, really. So I want to close with the wonderful words from one of our hymns this morning, because the gospel said the first will be last and the last will be first, and if transgender among the last, let's make them first. That's right from the gospel. There's a wideness in God's mercy like the wideness of the sea. There's a kindness in his justice that is more than liberty. There's welcome for the sinner and more graces for the good. There's mercy with the Savior. There is healing in his blood. For the love of God is broader than the measure of the mind, and the heart of the eternal is most wonderfully kind. If our love were but more faithful, we should take God at his word, and our life would be thanksgiving for the goodness of the Lord. Amen. Thank you all so much. Go in peace. Vote. Vote early, vote often.